Today, I want to talk about gold and the price of this beautiful yellow metal as it relates to war. How you doing, everybody? Welcome to Empire Precious Metals. Thanks for watching. I wanted to get into the discussion of gold and how war affects the price of this yellow metal. Recently, I actually came across an interesting article that I'm going to put down below in the description for you to read. I'm not going to go over everything and read it from my screen. I'll allow you guys to take the 8 to 10 minutes just to kind of thumb through it and check it out for yourself. But essentially, I was curious as to how gold reacts specifically to times of war. And what got me going down this rabbit hole essentially was that we just saw that the Fed raised interest rates yet again. And, I just was curious as to how, the interest rates essentially affect the price of gold, both short-term and long-term. And through my searches, I kind of came across this article that discussed gold and war. And it was very interesting. I don't think any of the information is necessarily going to be a shock for you, but it is going to put into perspective for you the different conflicts that occurred throughout the world, and it's going to pinpoint exactly when the price of gold shot up and then when the price of gold kind of stabilized and when it also came back down. Now, the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. And so we are still seeing the effects of that with some uncertainty as it relates to not just the price of precious metals, because we know that precious metals are a safe haven in times of war and economic turmoil, but we're also seeing the prices of energy change as well. We know that essentially Europe relied heavily on Russia for its supply of natural gas. And now, because Europe is standing strong and said, we condemn these acts by Russia, essentially, right, the natural gas has been shut off, right, between Russia and Europe. So Europe essentially is looking for alternative solutions so that they're not completely reliant on Russia's exports of natural gas. Now, today, I am speaking with an individual who happens to be the CEO of Traction Uranium, Lester Esteban, and he and I are going to talk about what is happening with the price of metals, but more specifically also, there's a conflict that's happening right now in Africa, specifically in the country of Niger, where there are some coups and rebellions that are occurring, and what this actually does to the price of uranium. And I think that this is just all kind of ties together well because essentially a lot of mining facilities throughout the world, they don't just mine one thing. That is the one thing that I was surprised to learn about through all of my discussions with a lot of these mining companies, was that essentially they are mining for multiple metals. Silver is almost like a byproduct of mining operations for one specific resource, right? If a company is specifically mining predominantly, let's say uranium, sometimes they'll find silver, sometimes they'll find gold as byproducts, or those are secondary or tertiary to their overall operations. Same thing goes with gold mining. So I thought that was very interesting when I learned that. So I thought that it would be very important to speak with Lester about operations that right now, how they're being affected because of these geopolitical conflicts. And then after that discussion, we will jump right back here to essentially end the video and discussion on gold. Today, I am very happy to have with me Lester Esteban, CEO of Traction Uranium. How's everything going, Lester?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on your show. I love your background. I wish I had something as cool as you. I just have a pretty lame hotel room in the back here.
Hey, it's okay. Work comes first always. But listen, you ended up getting a lot of brownie points with me because you complimented the background, the comic books and things like that. So you're welcome on any time. I appreciate people that have similar interests as me. But
well, if that stormtrooper starts moving, I'm jumping out of the screen, right?
That thing actually, that I made that, and I can actually I can actually wear that. It has all the electronics.
Awesome.
When we sign off of this interview, I'm going to send you a link so you could You could see all the components inside,
Nice.
electronics and everything. But
That's
enough
awesome.
of, yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. But enough of the cool stuff in the background. We have some cool things to talk about that have to deal with your company and some very important
For
things
sure.
too. I'm a news junkie, and I was actually seeing how there's some unrest right now that's happening in Niger. There's some coups that are currently underway, which is causing a lot of instability within the region, which obviously has a lot of uranium companies concerned. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brain as to, what that does to the overall markets and how that affects companies as a whole, specifically uranium companies such as yours.
No, for sure. No, that's a great question. So I guess to frame it up, there's about three really large producers. Your three biggest producers in the world are, of course, Kazakhstan, which is
Hmm.
about 40% of uranium that's produced, Canada being there, and Namibia. Niger is about 5% of the world's uranium supply. So, they're a leading supplier to the EU. I believe it's around just under 25, 24% of European uranium imports. So it's slightly ahead of Kazakhstan for the EU. So it's a significant concern that some people would see, especially with the unrest that's going on in Niger.
Okay.
But when you look at it, when a nuclear reactor, and this goes into kind of benefit the nuclear industry in general and
Sure.
nuclear energy, is when you are looking at a power plant, those fuel rods are roughly can last about a year, 2 years, typically. And then there's normally another supply of fuel rods just waiting in the background in storage for another 1 to 2 years. So when you're looking at like civil unrest or political geophysical issues such as what's going on in Niger, no, in terms of security of supply, they do have rods that are kind of in that background ready and waiting. So there is a long order horizon, but it does put into concern this whole new thing of energy security
Yeah.
and working with nations that are, where you have a safe supply, good mining jurisdictions that are stable and, safe political partners such as Canada to the US.
Right.
So, I think that is something that should be that would highlight in terms of when as countries are looking to go nuclear and really looking at converting their going into electrification, that going to countries that are safe, that are great mining jurisdictions, that are stable, such as Canada, is definitely something that should be considered strongly.
So let me jump on the term that you used, because this is obviously
Hmm.
something that a lot of people are paying attention to when it comes to energy security. We saw, because of the conflict with Russia invading Ukraine, we've seen some major upheaval within Europe, especially because Europe relied so heavily on Russia's supply of natural gas, right? So now we see this push of these European nations. Now, essentially, they had to cut the cord from Russia. They're looking to get into more nuclear energy. So, what is so special about nuclear energy? Why is it beneficial for these European countries to kind of look at nuclear energy more so than natural gas?
Well, just the same thing as in terms of Niger. Is that one thing is that security, that long order process. So, if you have a fully loaded reactor that's running and operating, that's about, you got 1 or 2 years before those spent cells have to be replaced, those fuel cells. And then as you have a backup set of fuel cells ready and waiting in storage. So you actually have a 2 to 4 year horizon
Hmm.
that, uh, purchasers have or utilities have to make that next purchase of uranium or fuel rods. So by having a longer horizon, things like natural disasters, political unrest, unlike what you're seeing in Russia, or as or fuel or fossil fuels, when you cut off that tap, then you have a very short ordering window. You don't have that much of a buffer. So that's one thing. It's that buffer that kind of ensures, that kind of safety of supply. And also another thing is, I'm in South Korea right now. Um, it was just before I came here, there was monsoons. It was nonstop raining. It was just this insane kind of weather that was going on. And then just by the time I landed, it was I get public announcements that saying it's 35, 37 heat warnings every day, like every 2 hours. It's 35, 40. It's unbearable. It's very hot. So wherever you sit on that Paris Climate Accord or global warming, the weather is changing drastically. And when we look at things in terms of like when you step out of like, I'm in Canada, that's my home. We use natural gas is easy to access. You turn on your furnace. But when you're on the other side, a lot of electricity is constantly being used in like electric air conditioning,
Yeah.
electric vehicles. Everything is the electrification is happening at a very fast pace. So whereas you have nuclear, it's 24/7 baseload power. Once that reactor is running, it's constantly running. It's just basically you're splitting atoms to generate heat, creating steam, spinning a turbine. You got that baseload power that's happening all the time. So yeah, I would say when you're looking at the stability of a long order horizon for getting that fuel to run your nuclear power plants and being able to generate electricity, and you have that consistent, stable baseload power that's powering your air conditioning, your EV vehicles, that is definitely something that a lot of nations are looking now, and they're actually taking a really long look at either extending reactors, adding to the reactor fleet, or turning on reactors that they shut down because they were trying to rely on solar, wind power, and those are all great. Renewables are all fantastic, but when the sun isn't shining and the water levels are low and there's no wind blowing, you need
Right.
that stable baseload power that nuclear can provide.
Now, I saw a very shocking number. The amount of, because this kind of plays into the overall supply of nuclear energy and uranium, I should say, to the world. You had mentioned Kazakhstan. You had mentioned, Canada. Russia is a major energy supplier to the world. I saw, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's something like only 271 people employed in the United States, domestically in the United States, that have to deal with uranium, the uranium industry. Which to me, I was surprised because United States, if I'm not mistaken, is the number one consumer of uranium. So the fact that you've got such a tiny population involved domestically here in the U.S. and we are the world's largest consumer. On top of that, again, you have some of the geopolitical issues that are happening. You had just mentioned how the extreme changes in weather can really affect how the world is getting its energy. So with all these these things that are kind of up in the air, more or less, and not exactly stable all the time. Canada's Athabasca Basin is, I guess, like a reliable and a critical area and resource for the United States. So I'm just kind of curious as to why that region is so important to the U.S. And then I have a funny tidbit, not necessarily a funny tidbit, but a small. This is a small world tidbit about the Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan, but I'll get into that in a moment. But I'm just curious as to why is that region just so important and vital to the U.S.
No, absolutely, and you nailed it. So the world relies 10% of global electricity comes from nuclear, but in the U.S., 25% of the world's uranium demand comes from the U.S. So, and half of that demand comes from Kazakhstan, a former Russian state, right? So what really makes Canada stand out is we're just friendly neighbors.
Yeah.
We're the friendliest neighbors. Long unprotected border that's coming out of it, and just above you in Saskatchewan, where I live, I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. 8 hours up north is the Athabasca Basin. It is home to some of the world's highest grade uranium deposits. In Saskatchewan, we first discovered uranium in the 1940s. So over 60 years of experience and infrastructure, engineering, chemistry, science, and technology that has been going through the years and developed around the uranium industry. We're a mining rich province. Consistently, I believe last time we on the Fraser Institute, we ranked second in terms of jurisdiction for mining. So we're a safe jurisdiction in order to purchase uranium from. We don't have geopolitical really unrest. We don't have. We may pick some fights. We may have gotten our Tim Hortons kicked out of the U.S. We might get some things, but we're typically. Yeah, normally it's because of the U.S. hockey or Canadian hockey when it comes down to the juniors. Otherwise, we're fairly friendly across the border.
Yeah.
So, and the basin is just a beast when it comes to that concentrating. So, sometimes we get up to 10 to 20 times above the international average purity. You're flickering there.
I know. I don't know what the heck is going on. I'm like, let me take this off of here. All right, that was strange. All right, so continue.
Yeah, so that's the most important thing is you got this great, safe, very very highly concentrated, great experience coming out of your neighbors just up north, and I think in terms of the darling and the company that really everyone kind of looks up to in terms of the uranium space is Cameco. So Cameco is in our province in Saskatchewan. Everyone likes to. When you want to look at the pulse of uranium and nuclear industry in general, people always look at Cameco, follow that stock, and take a look at it. They happen to be a neighbor to one of our properties. So our Key Lake South property is just neighboring the Key Lake mill, one of the world's Cameco's operating uranium mills. So, it's very important that, a long time ago in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the supply was coming out of mines. About 77% of the supply was coming around mines. And then when Fukushima happened and you got that downturn in the economy, Japan turned off all the reactors. A lot of people were shying away after Fukushima from nuclear. So then you had this surplus, and it was called secondary supply. And a big thing of secondary supply was an old program that the U.S. did with Russia. It was I believe it was megatons to megawatts, I believe is what it was called. When U.S. and Russia converted old weapons grade uranium into about 15,000 metric tons of low enriched uranium that was used for the U.S. to power U.S. nuclear power plants. So it was converting warheads into low enriched uranium, which of course bottomed out kind of the pricing. And because there was this glut of, because at one point the U.S. had a lot of human resources and capital in terms of like uranium and was actually a large producer. But there was such a glut of cheap uranium in the market. Kazakhstan kind of came in, and the megatons to megawatts kind of came in that over time, it kind of drained out. But here in Saskatchewan, Athabasca Basin, we're still going. So,
Right.
Since the 1940s. So we have uranium. Cameco has been very prudent in terms of their production. And people like us, Traction Uranium, who's into exploration, are looking to be part of that solution as, demand and supply, it's really constantly changing.
The small tidbit that I was going to share is prior to starting my YouTube channel and getting involved with precious metals, and before I started having guests on the channel and talking about different types of mining companies and precious metals dealers and so on, a good friend of mine who I met through there's a charity organization known as the 501st Legion, which specializes in all of the stormtrooper, Star Wars type things, everything. Anyhow, he happens to be a geologist in Saskatchewan. He lives in Saskatchewan for uranium. He worked for a company, I think is Orano, something.
Orano, yeah.
Orano.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a small world, and I actually texted him yesterday. I said, "Hey, I've actually got a interview tomorrow with somebody from one of your competitors." So I just thought it was it's just a small world that, I know somebody personally who happens to be involved in your region, in your field of all things. But getting back to, I had a couple more quick questions for you because I know it's late for you over there, and I appreciate you taking the time.
No worries.
I wanted to talk to you about your investor base. I was looking at your website and I saw something around 80 or 85% of your shares are tightly held by a small group of investors. I was just kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more about the investor base.
Yeah, so having a good investor base that believes in the story, that's in it for the long term, that are in there strategically is really great for us. About, I would say, less than 40%, around, I'm going to get really nerdy, but it was 37% is founders and strategic partners. They were all part of the initial kind of formation of Traction Uranium. Another over 50%, just under 55%, 54% is institutional and high net worth. So we're looking at like Maple Leaf funds, the funds, Sprott, those kind of institutionals are in there, but I'd say 54%. And the 8% is through F3 or F3 Corp, formerly Fission Uranium, who is our JV partner on Hardy Bay. So they have about 8%. So, we got a very tight share structure, which makes it, really great, as, they all believe in our story, and they believe in the long run.
Yeah, I was going to actually say, anytime that you see a company that's publicly traded but has, a handful of core shareholders, that obviously they really care on how the company is performing, right? Everybody wants to see the stock skyrocket because it'll, fatten their wallet. So whenever I see that, and I see that a company is tightly held, I always like to, kind of bring that to the forefront and let my viewers know, because that's just very significant in my opinion. One quick question also before we wrap up. 2023, we're not done yet. We have 4 months left, give or take. What are some catalysts you see coming down the road that are going to be really, really impactful for your company?
Yeah, so our last program, our Key Lake South property, which is neighboring with Cameco, our drill program, we still have to follow up on this 6 meters of high radioactivity that we discovered in the overburden. So, when the drill came in less than 1.7 meters, less than, 1.7 meters into the dirt, we hit this 6 meter zone of high radioactivity. And, we want to get back to it because we want to test that overburden, as, in a year like the previous program in the fall. Our research team was doing some sampling was going over the soil, doing some groundwork, and they found this radioactive soil, which we call it the black soil. We had that analyzed and tested last fall, and it turned out to be actually less than 1% uranium. So now we're really curious of what this 6 meter zone is, and if it is in the overburden or that glacial till. So that stuff that you remove before you start doing open pit, normally that dirt that people don't care about. Well, if that there is some great promise in that 6 meter zone if we can see it once we test out what that is. So we're looking to really get back to our Key Lake South property in order to find out what that zone 1 overburden is. So if you go through our news reports or news releases and take a look at our program, it's all in there. I encourage your viewers, your listeners to actually take a look at our news flow to see that zone 1 and what the excitement is around that as we try to get back there to kind of test that. Because, when you have a Cameco's Key Lake Mill just right beside us and it's just right in the dirt, it's a great opportunity where you can just, if everything pans out, everything looks great, then it's a really great opportunity. And then we're also coming back to our Hardy Bay property, which is a JV with F3 Corp. That's an ice road program, so we'll be getting ready for that in the winter of 2024. So these are some
Right
great
around the
catalysts. Correct, yeah. So, we're vectoring in on the source of these high-grade uranium boulder trains that we're discovering out of Rocher. So we're coming back to two of our exciting properties, Hardy Bay and KLS, and we can't wait to get back there and really just unlock the potential of our properties there.
Very cool. Well, Lester, I really do appreciate that you took the time
Absolutely.
out of your schedule. I know, again, you were looking at midnight over there, so
It's okay. It's 9
early
o'clock,
for you.
my normal time.
Okay, that makes sense. But listen, you're welcome anytime to come on. I appreciate you. And and I'm looking forward to having you on in the next few months to get some updates for the viewers. And I'll put all the information for your company down below in the description. But again, Lester Esteban, pleasure to have you from Traction Uranium, and you're welcome anytime, sir.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So there you have it, everybody. Great conversation with Lester Esteban. I appreciate him being on. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the price of gold and silver, especially in times of war and geopolitical conflict. I'm curious, do those times of conflict and war, do they affect your buying patterns? Are you essentially changing the way that you are buying silver and gold based on wars and these conflicts that are occurring throughout the world? Just curious if it actually is affecting you and your buying patterns, not even necessarily because of the change of spot price, but just psychologically. Do you feel more fearful? Does it make you want to go out and put more money into metals? Do you hold back and stay away from metals and just hang on to more cash? Let me know in the comments.